Hello, I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar today. My name is Phil Whitmer and I'm a member of the marketing team at Velosio. I will serve as your facilitator today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll pull those at the end. With that, I'll pass you off to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Welcome, everyone. We're here today to talk about digital transformation. What does it mean and how does it help your organization? Many have discussed this topic in general terms, but we wanted to highlight GSG's transformation journey. And so we have a panel of speakers today to talk about that experience. I'm your host, Carolyn Norton. I'm the Cloud Director of Engineering and Operations here at Velosio, and I'm going to serve as the host today for our webinar.
Sounds good. I'm Andy. I am Andy Ho. I am the head of IT and Office Services at Global Strategy Group, or GSG. So I guess I'm the guest here. So we'll get some more details as we talk.
Hi, I'm Lorna Link, and I am the BC Express Practice Director at Velosio, and I had the great pleasure of working with Andy and his team.
Hey there, my name is Raihan Gill. I'm the Director of Digital Transformation, our new advisory services practice here at Velosio, where we provide, proactive advisory services, a more detailed and discovery cycle to create really a robust and concrete foundation for our clients to ease them into a transformative process and transition from legacy technologies over to our newer age modern-based technologies in the Microsoft tech stack.
Hi, my name's Erica Ellis, and I'm a principal consultant at Velosio on the Dynamics customer engagement team. And I actually helped Global Strategy Group implement Dynamics in their organization.
Amazing, amazing group of people here that have worked with GSG in their journey. So Andy, let's set the table here. Let's talk about when you came into GSG. What was the environment like? What did it look like? What was the technology landscape? What did you come into when you became a part of the GSG family?
Sure. So when I started at GSG, it was like the summer of 2015. And surprisingly, at least to me at the time, was that GSG had been in business already for 20 years by the time I got there. But when I got there, I was their first full-time IT hire ever. They had mainly just depended upon like a mix of like their office manager, finance, and there was like a part-time like consultant CIO that was helping out prior to me getting there, and also an MSP that did tech support, an off-site MSP that was doing tech support for it. But everything was still, from a tech perspective, very much a mom and pop shop. Like, most of the laptops weren't purchased through a business account. It was like the office manager literally running to Best Buy and buying laptops for people. It seemed like, when they started, it was they had, just before I'd gotten there, they did migrate everyone to Office 365 and then brought some level of consistency in regards to the productivity suite and email. But it was still like a mix of like shared drives, shared network drives, were like file storage, as well as different people using different things. So some people were using Dropbox, OneDrive, SharePoint, you name it, someone was probably using it at that point. So there was not much standardization to that. From like an internal system standpoint, the firm had been using Salesforce for some time for CRM. But ironically, they had modified Salesforce so heavily to handle how GSG does their business, which I'll talk about in a sec. So that it not only was a CRM system, they had modified Salesforce to the point where it was also many ways a PSA, or professional services automation system. And through that, they use Salesforce as a timesheet system to track people's hours to these projects. And it had gotten to the point that when I got there and people knew that the employees that were there knew I was going to be taking over Salesforce, they were like, oh, so you're going to take over our timesheet system. And I was like, oh, what's your timesheet system? They're like, Salesforce. And I'm like, you realize that outside of these four walls, you're not going to find a single person that refers to Salesforce as a timesheet system. Like, no one thinks of Salesforce. And people would just be like, really? You know, people like they were floored that like they just assumed if everyone used timesheets, they would use Salesforce. And I was just like, and meanwhile, I'm like, no, you guys are an anomaly. So it was sort of that atmosphere. There was, it was, and with different things, not, in this case of Salesforce not being used properly, or things that were just a little more scattershot. And the firm knew this, and and the reason they brought me in was because they knew it was time to professionalize, to put structure, have a real IT strategy and a plan moving forward, and to move the firm forward, and embracing technology and so forth. That the firm is not going to grow and not be competitive if it stayed in the current state it was when I got there. And so I didn't explain what GSG does for everyone that doesn't know or hasn't taken the time to Google this. So Global Strategy Group is a democratic political research firm, as well as a communications and public affairs firm. So we focus on supporting, politicians at the national to state level, across the country on the Democratic spectrum, as well as working with corporations and with nonprofits on the various causes and public affairs drives that they're looking for. And so in many ways, we are very much like a consulting firm in that sense. Our staff are our resources. We get projects, whether it's a polling or whether it is building out a communication strategy or a public affairs plan. And we bill hours to it, just like any other consulting firm you would expect to. Sometimes it's fixed price, sometimes per hour, and so forth. But that's the type of business that we do.
That's really great insight to who GSG was and is, and what challenges we were facing. And it sounds like the organization knew of these challenges. They brought you in. Once they started to understand where the organization could use it seems like some strategic guidance, how did you come up with what business outcomes you were trying to achieve and what to tackle in terms of focusing on those challenges?
Yeah, the first areas that I tackled were things that I saw as immediate pain points. And one of the biggest ones was file management, because they were still on network drives, and they had already, by the time I got there, they had already run out of server space. And my predecessor, who left in a bit of mysterious circumstances, like he literally just ghosted and never came back, had set up
a challenge.
Yeah. So, well, and that leads to the story, is that he had set up an Azure site that had moved a lot of and archived a lot of documents to it, but he never left the password for it or anything for anyone. And so one of my first challenges was trying to guess and decipher what he could have used as a password. Fortunately, our MSP was pretty handy in this, and fortunately, he didn't have the best password standards in regards to, or password like best practices.
But it worked in your favor.
But it worked incredibly well in his favor, because in this day and age, you get shot if you you did some of the things. But I mean, again, there's a reason why they brought me in too. But we were able to figure it out, and it was a concern because of the network drives, and because some of it was archived in a place that was temporarily inaccessible till we got to it. And also, as for anyone that recalls back in the day of network drives and everything being localized, is the only way you can access it is through VPN. And VPNs, especially back in 2015, I can't believe I just said that, it can be very slow and cumbersome. And so, the staff just complained, like, we were running out of space for files, things were hard to find when they worked from home or anywhere else. It was incredibly slow. And so that became my first, immediate areas. We got to fix that, because we're not going to see the end of the year. That's what it felt like. We're not going to see the end of the year unless this got fixed. So that was one. The Salesforce one was a big issue, because we were using it as a CRM and a PSA. Salesforce, as hopefully everyone here knows, is not designed to be a PSA. And it had been in many ways cobbled together and Frankenstein into becoming one. and all of that custom development was showing the cracks at this point. And the initial plan was figure out how to stabilize it and get it to work better. There was never a plan of like move off of Salesforce. So worked with Salesforce, signed I think it was a 2-year or 3-year deal at the time to lock in our licensing costs, and we're going to dig in and figure this out and get Salesforce to work. So that was another priority. And then some of the other priorities we tackled were like hardware infrastructure related within the offices. We also tackled a need for more instantaneous communications. Like constant emailing was driving a lot of people, certain people nuts, and a number of people nuts, where you get like 1-word email responses, and then you jump into a thread or get into a thread, and it's like you have no idea because people reply to different parts of the thread, and then you have like all these conversation threads and so forth. This was back when Microsoft they still have it, but they were running Yammer as their main source of that, and Yammer was people did not like Yammer at all. And so there, folks wanted something that bridged that gap. So I think those were probably the big 3 things that was there when I got there.
I think I heard user experience was definitely a challenge factor that you wanted to tackle, right?
So user experience was one. Well, actually, that user experience was a huge one that both I wanted to tackle and personally wanted to focus on as my sort of IT strategy. Like most of my IT is very more people focused and process focused than it is really on straight technology focused. The other example I can give too that I focused on was with our MSP, and I think I've told some of you this story in previous conversations. But like when I got to GSG and I started talking with staff and I started learning about all the different tech issues people were having, like this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Someone was working with like a keyboard where like half the keys didn't work and that they would use another keyboard, like all sorts of craziness. And I'd be like, why wouldn't you raise it to the tech support? And they're like, oh, they're such a pain to deal with. You have to open a ticket and then they get back to you after so much time and there's all this back and forth. So we're just like, whatever. So they don't really contact tech support unless they literally could not work anymore. And then I have my intro conversation with the tech support firm, and I talk with them, and they come in and they're like, you are our favorite customer, you're our best customer, you guys never have any issues. And I'm like, interesting you say that.
Little do you know.
You're not wrong in this, or rather it's not so much that we don't have any issues, we don't open very many tickets, and that's where we want to dig into. So we worked with them, and one of the key changes to start with is we started having on-site tech support. Not having someone on site, there's like I've quickly discovered there is a mental barrier to raising tickets when you have to force someone to email or call, if they have to open a ticket of some sort. If there's someone literally sitting there that you can walk up to, you're going to walk up to them and talk to them about something versus if you had to open a ticket, you'll just not say anything. Most people just won't say anything. And so that immediately, move that away. And my philosophy oftentimes with tech support is I actually hate metrics that talk about like, this is the number of tickets we had, number of tickets solved, because it's like that old Dilbert like incentives of, you just want to increase the amount of tickets and solve the tickets, but it doesn't measure customer satisfaction and is whether or not everything is working the way it should. And I wanted to focus on, are our staff happy? Do they have everything they need to work? And are they happy with how long it took to resolve it or how quickly it resolved it? So that's a great thing to your point, Carolyn, is that was a large part of my focus, was like, let's get everyone working and happy about what they're working with.
And it sounds like you didn't come in gun ho. You got that, you have that end user experience to focus on, but you initially went in saying, all right, let's work with what we have. Let's see what we can do in the organization. At some point, when did you recognize that perhaps there might be other solutions that need to be in contention with what you have today? What other options are available beyond what you have today?
Oh, pretty much immediately. Like as soon as like recognizing that these were issues, like my brain already starts spinning as to like what are the possibilities. Like for example, like with file storage, right? So it's like you spot the issue and immediately like, okay, we, out of the box, because the firm had already moved to Office 365. Like, so what's wrong with OneDrive? What's wrong with, SharePoint? What have we done so far into digging into that and discovering that people hated both SharePoint and OneDrive. Personally, I hate SharePoint anyway, but I was happy to discover that no one there liked it either. But no one liked OneDrive either. In fact, despite the fact that the firm had pushed Office 365 and everyone seemed to embrace it almost immediately, the one piece of Office that only like 4 or 5 people jumped into was OneDrive. Almost universally, the firm took a one look at OneDrive and was like, yeah, never mind. We're going to keep doing what we were doing before. And so for some cases it was, I'd rather deal with all the problems of the network drive than move to OneDrive. For others who wanted more of the convenience of having like the web experience, the cloud, the shared and everything else, they would just move to Google Drive, their personal Google Drive or Dropbox, because they were familiar that with their personal files, and they were like, we'll just use that. That's simpler. Which
along with your experience, you're also contending with adoption and making sure that what you're providing as a solution is actually going to get adopted by your end users.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because if your end users don't adopt what you put together, then you just wasted a ton of money. I mean, it's as simple as that. Like, it doesn't matter how great you think your solution is or how efficient it is or how much money you're going to save. If your end users don't adopt it, or you spend a ton of money forcing them to adopt it, like, squishing like a round peg into a square hole, it's not going to work. The best systems are the ones that your users immediately gravitate toward. And start using and leveraging it as quickly as possible. And if you can't get to that point, if you can't build up to that point, then you're wasting your time and money in many ways. You're like, you need to, that's what you need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, like the solutions that we adopted, for example, for like file management, which was Box ultimately, and even for like messaging, we ended up going with Slack, are 2 perfect examples where adoption was near immediate. I mean, Slack was like, to this day, we moved our entire firm to Slack, and it is singularly the most organic, easiest migration adoption I've ever done in my entire career. Like, it was literally like, Slack's available and people are already like posting Giphies and emojis, and all sorts of channels are being built, and people are already coming up with structures. It was like, okay, that was easy. My work is done. It was like opening a toy box and everyone instantly knew how to use it, like opening a box of Legos and everyone knows, what to do next.
That's a perfect analogy, right? If a kid doesn't want to play with the toy, off to the corner it goes. Yep. So how did Velosio get introduced with GSG? Where in this journey? It sounds like, again, you had this strong focus on end user experience. You recognize that there was adoption opportunities or reassessments. You mentioned other solutions in your organization that you recognize. Again, there is an area of opportunity here to help your organization. How did Velosio get in the mix, and how did that relationship start?
So how Velosio got into this mix actually comes back to Salesforce, our old friend Salesforce. So like I mentioned, my initial intent was to figure out how to get Salesforce to work, and we bought ourselves time with locking and everything. And we spent 2 years like truly giving it the absolute college try of getting Salesforce to work and meet all the requirements that we had. But one of the biggest challenges that we have as GSG in regards to how we feel a CRM should work is how we measure our opportunities, our business, and how we reward people for bringing in business to the firm. Because for starters, at GSG, we don't have dedicated salespeople. So there's not a sales team that works leads, brings in sales, and then transfers it over to a project team. Our partners, our senior VPs, they're the ones, and senior directors and so forth, they're the ones that go out and bring in the business. And the way we measure this is like a typical CRM, like out of the box, opportunities come in, you start tracking it, and then the moment the opportunity becomes like, sold one, you close the opportunity, and that's the end of that. And then the person that brought it in gets credit for that win. At GSG, the credit doesn't actually get allocated at the moment the opportunity closes as won. We continue tracking what happens after that opportunity, like what projects are spun off that opportunity. Oftentimes it's one-to-one, opportunity closes, it spawns one project, but sometimes it can be more than one project. And then we want to track what happens to those projects, and are those projects completed to, and all the revenue has been recognized from those projects, because our people don't get full credit for the sale until all the revenue is recognized at the end of the project. Which is why this PSA piece is so important to us, and why like timesheets and everything else was very important to us, is because you've only done half your job if you get the client in the door. You don't do your full job until you fully satisfy the client and they've paid you, and finances recognize that money. And until that magical moment, you're not done yet, in essence. So so we had cobbled Salesforce to continue tracking the work beyond the typical, one close piece through that. And that was the part that was really, as the 1 year went by and the second year went by, it was really starting to show all the cracks of a custom development that didn't take into account like a business that was evolving and different things. And we recognized that it was gonna, in essence, we can no longer like modify our way out of the hole that it was in. If we were going to stay with Salesforce, we were going to have to start from scratch with, in essence, a fresh instance of Salesforce and build from that. And the idea from there was not to build something custom like we did previously, but to leverage one of Salesforce's partners that does PSA and build it together in a way that would meet all of our business requirements. So even up to this point, our goal was pure Salesforce, but recognizing that, it was going to be much broader and more expensive to do.
You were looking for a more total solution for GSG,
Yep.
right? Not necessarily, here's the product and let's see if it works for the org. You really wanted to approach it as, is the current solution, whether it's Salesforce or not, going
Yep.
to meet the nuances of GSG as you highlighted earlier?
Yep,
So
100%.
we thought Microsoft. How did that happen?
So it happened. Well, it didn't happen. I didn't immediately think Microsoft either. So what happened really quickly was that went back to Salesforce, explaining what the situation was and wanting to see if they can extend our licensing costs at the same rate. And they basically told us, for all intents and purposes, laughed, told us, yeah, that's funny. We plan to increase your licensing costs by 7%. And that the only way we would prevent that is if we just bought more licenses or spent more money on Salesforce. But in essence, they were like, you need to spend way more money on us. And there was definitely a strong undertone of arrogance, because they were clearly not expecting us to do anything else but spend all that money on them. But the fortunate piece was that for us, I had entered that discussion in the second of our third, before our third year of our contract. So we had 1 year. So after that discussion, I was like, we're done. Internally talked with all the folks in GSG, like, we're done with Salesforce. Basically, this is what they are saying. We have 1 year to switch, because if we don't, we're paying 7%. Here's the amount that we have to pay just to stay in the game. And that was when I started doing a search of, okay, what are all the replacements for Salesforce for a firm of our size, which was at the time just under 100 staff members. So about 100, just about 100 licenses or 80 licenses at the time. Be able to do CRM, PSA, so forth. And pulled in a bunch of different folks, from NetSuite to Microsoft Dynamics to Zoho to a bunch of boutique ones that, of various names and so forth, across the board, and just started reaching out to them. For Microsoft, because I didn't know anyone that did Dynamics at that time, I literally just went on to the Microsoft forum, filled it out, said I'm interested in Dynamics, and I got connected with a person I still keep in touch with at Microsoft, who was fantastic, because he reached out and was like, and we got into a whole conversation, explained the whole situation. And he was like, I think I have the perfect firm for you, from our partners. And he's like, I'm going to go check and come back. And he came back, and it was, you know, what Velosio was at the time, which was Socius, and it was like, this is the firm. They're based, you know, they're based in Columbus, Ohio. I think they're a perfect fit for who you guys are and what you guys want to do. So from there, he just put me in touch with Socius, now Velosio, and the rest is literally history from there. But that's how I got to you guys into Microsoft, and from there, you guys were like Microsoft basically anointed you guys their champion for this fight, right? Because even then, I wasn't like in my head like we're definitely going Microsoft like at all, like just.
That was going to be my next question. All right, you have your different options here.
Right.
Here again, you have all the menu is yours. You can choose
Yep.
what you want to go with. What led you down this particular solution as it relates to, again, what you're facing? And what I love, Andy, is that you gave it the college try, you identified the user impact to the organization. Obviously, the organization recognized challenges. And then you didn't wait till that end of the contract with Salesforce. You started investigating, again, that college try that you mentioned earlier. What more can you do with the solution? And recognized early on, all right, we need to make a serious decision on our challenge here. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck again. And we have an increase in our in our overall cost. So, you know, and I call that out because very often organizations kind of wait very close to the end, and then it becomes a rush for them to really pick a solution, make sure it's right for them, force the users to, you know, get onto it quickly, which is, again, adoption super important. And there may not be, sometimes there's positive results, but sometimes there are not good results. So again, just calling out the timeline is very interesting for you guys because it seems to have worked out.
And part of that was like I had a very specific end date, like literally just marked on the calendar. This is when our Salesforce licenses end, and then working backwards from that, it was like that means that we have to have been migrated off of Salesforce by this point, or we're screwed. And then working backwards from there, you know, knowing that means requirements need to be here. This needs, you know, all these things all the way backwards.
No, that's amazing. That's great stuff.
And then to your original question, so we lined up all of our horses, and to be perfectly blunt, I was never expecting Microsoft to win this, like ever. Like, so prior to even coming to GSG, like I've had a lot of experience with Salesforce. I'd worked with SAP, I've worked with Siebel back when Siebel was the thing before Oracle got bought. I was actually expecting like potentially NetSuite to work its way out, or maybe even one of the boutique ones. There was also one Sugar CRM that I thought might be intriguing as well, because I had heard great things about it. But Microsoft had never entered the equation in my head, like when I first started this, because I was like, Microsoft. Because in some ways, Microsoft, like with Office, is like, you know, makes things super easy. But I always joke with everyone is that Microsoft has this stunning ability to make something both incredibly easy and incredibly complex, often at the exact same moment. They're frustrating in that there are some things that can be super easy, and then like you flip to the admin console and you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, why is this thing such a mess? And it carries over across everything that they do. So long story short, didn't expect it, but your team did a great job in presenting Microsoft and demonstrating how Dynamics had out of the box had both the ability to do CRM and PSA, which helped make it fairly unique amongst all the different systems that we were looking at. The majority of the ones that we looked at required like some level of custom development to create the PSA, and we really did not want to go down that path after our experience with Salesforce of custom developing.
Yep.
And others like NetSuite at the time required us, like, yes, they were like, oh yeah, we can do PSA, we can do CRM, but they're like, we don't do implementations unless you first change your ERP to us. And we're like, yes, we plan on changing our ERP, but we have to change our CRM because, again, the timeline of when Salesforce is going to end, and we don't have the time or energy to replace ERP first and then do CRM. And so NetSuite took themselves out because they're like, we won't work with you unless you change your ERP first. And so like, okay, thanks. And so long and short of it, Microsoft, Sugar CRM, and a very boutique company were the three finalists amongst this. And after like final presentations and going through everything, it was basically down to Microsoft and Sugar CRM, and the pros and cons of the two were almost diametrically opposed, because the pros of Microsoft was CRM PSA right out of the box. But the cons is that it was, from the demos and everything else, people felt it was clunky. There was a lot of clunkiness to how Microsoft worked. And there were definitely things that were like, yeah, Microsoft says do this, but we don't really do that. Or we don't do that. But they love the fact that they could see the clear, the clear parts that were already built in place, that didn't have to be custom developed. And Sugar CRM, presented something that was very, very streamlined, and very pretty, and also was, customizable because it was built like on, in essence on Drupal. But we knew we had to custom build the PSA. And at the end of the day, the decision was we do not want to custom build anything. And so Microsoft went out on this. And so then we went out to Microsoft and we got introduced to Erica. And then the timeline began of, all right, now we've decided on this, we've got to get started and build this out.
Erica, based on everything Andy has said, how has Velosio, taken Dynamics CE CRM and help that solution meet GSG's needs? How were we able to do that?
Yeah, so going back to what Andy said about out of the box, PSA had all of the functionality that they needed, but it also had more that they didn't need. It just didn't meet their business requirements. But unfortunately, the system, we could configure it to smooth over those parts, right? So we were able to sit down and say, okay, we have this great solution out of the box. What can we do to improve the user experience and make it as easy as possible for them? The users at GSG, it's a very hardworking, busy group of people. So they needed things to be fast, easy to use, all of that good stuff. So we sat down and figured out what that flow looked like and used the simple configuration tools within PSA and Dynamics to smooth those edges out and keep that user experience as quick and simple as possible.
Amazing. Now, so that helped with the aggressive timeline of, we got to get off of Slack as soon as possible. I also know that at some point there was a decision to go into Dynamics BC, which is another Dynamics family that Microsoft has. How did that come about?
So the idea that we needed to change our ERP was always in the back of our heads, because besides Salesforce, we were also on the ERP, and ERP is a very generous term for this. Like an accounting system that we were using was Sage 50, which for those familiar from back in the day was just Peachtree. So in essence, it's an accounting software that back in the day you would buy out of a box from Best Buy and use it for your mom and pop shop to do your small business accounting needs. That at this point GSG had long since outgrown, and knew that we had to move on to a better, more robust system. But unlike Salesforce, Sage 50 is fairly inexpensive. And unlike Salesforce in the way it was falling apart, Sage 50 wasn't necessarily falling apart. Yes, it didn't have all the full controls that a medium-sized firm needs, or yes, there are certain things that are clunky and don't work that great, or there are certain limitations. But at the end of the day, invoices are being sent, revenues being recognized, the GLs being, all that work.
Job done.
Right. It got the job done. So it was not the priority to start until we had our CRM fixed. And then once that was done, then we were like, okay, we need to replace Sage 50. And the other thing I want to say before we jump down the BC side too, just in regards to just the accelerated timeline, I want to point out that Erica and her team, we actually finished the project early. So like I said, we in the sense that we had till like, it was the end of September to switch from like was when Salesforce's licenses ended. We finished before the summer, like right before the summer. I want to say like right after Memorial Day, June. The project was technically done, and we made a decision to delay the user rollout because summer vacations had started kicking in, and we were like, we need people back in the like everyone back in the office. We can't roll out a system that everyone uses while half the firm is going to be on vacation. And so yeah, so we actually finished the project early and intentionally delayed rollout for about 2 months to wait till everyone came back. So we didn't roll it out to the week after Labor Day. We're like, we give everyone to Labor Day, and then they come back, they get back into the groove, and then we're going to force migrate everyone at that point. So
that leads me to a really question. We talked about user experience. Again, the timeline is working out amazing.
right.
How did you guys help end user adoption? How did you get the buy-in from the users that the solution, you know, again, we talked about it earlier, you're picking a solution, everything seems to be the right fit for GSG. How did you get their buy-in? How did you get leadership buy-in? And how did the adoption get rolled out?
So buy-in started from leadership from the very beginning, from the moment we decided that, like, from the decision that we were leaving Salesforce and going with someone else. It had to be bought in from our most senior leadership. And so I report to our managing partner, and our managing partner and I were adamant that we would get full buy-in across the board. And he made a special point that he was going to make them sign like something, just somewhat for the show of it, but also something that he's just like, I want them to realize the seriousness, that there's no backing out, no pointing fingers afterwards or anything else, that you are bought in. And at that point forward, you are going to do nothing else but support that this is going to work. So the decision to leave Salesforce, the decision to move to Microsoft, and then the decision of like rollout and everything else, that they were fully bought into it from the beginning. So it was very top down. I never had to fight up to be able to convince someone or reword how something is positioned or anything else. It was, this is what we're doing. Yes, we would have discussions and back and forth, and some things may change, but the bottom, like, our plan was bought in from the top down to me. And then from there, it was sort of multi-pronged. I would present in staff meetings, through emails, through Slack, like what we were doing, what are the next steps, what to expect. And from senior leadership to the practice managers down, they would reinforce that and ensure that people were complying. And there were obviously people that would be like, oh yeah, whatever. And then they would get feedback from their business side that, no, this is not a whatever. You do need to listen to this. You do need to follow this. So it was very helpful in keeping it structured. So folks knew that, like, we had told them at the beginning of summer that, we didn't necessarily say, oh, we're done and ready, but we were just like, we're going to roll this out at, the week after Labor Day. This is what you need to prepare for. And people are going in and out of vacations, and we would occasionally remind folks. Internally, like, we started doing the migration near the end of August. Like, we started our work. Like, it's not like we waited till after Labor Day to start our work internally, but like, so end of summer, we basically fired everything back up again. Started getting everything ready, started doing like the initial prep for the migration and all that. We got our, like, right around Labor Day, I presented it all to all staff again, what we were doing. We had, like, our internal team had already, like, UAT the whole thing. And we basically split them up to sit with different users. Like, folks would travel to different offices to make sure that, the week of rollout, we had a very clear timeline of, like, Monday, you're in Salesforce, Tuesday, you're in Salesforce. At the end of 5 p.m., if it's not in Salesforce, it's not going in, period. Like, that's it. You're stopped. System's locked. Write that, whatever it is that you think you need that in there, write it on, type it into Word, write it on Note thing. It's not going into a system until this time on, or it was like Thursday or Friday, but like whatever time it wasn't going in until, until Dynamics went live on the following week. So well, it wasn't the end of the week, but the following week. And so people had very clear guidelines of what they were to do and stuff. And people were getting like, excited, or at least talking about it, like, oh my God, yeah, it's like, ha ha ha, I don't have to put this in today or whatever. So folks knew, and then the day came and folks got in, and yeah, there were hiccups, but it was nothing that egregious, right, Erica? Like, I don't remember, like, nothing stands out in my mind as particularly egregious, or like nothing blew up, or I still want to say knock on wood, but it's like so many years ago, it's nothing.
We're safe now.
It's truly all safe now, but yeah, nothing truly bad happened. Like, and a lot of the stuff was people just getting used to the new UI. But yeah, it worked as smooth as can be, as you could ask for all a firm-wide system rollout of this nature. It was
I think it's a testament, especially to how well you planned, your strategic, output overall, and then you put them at the forefront of everything. And you focused on change management and adoption at the start. I think that's really important in a digital transformation, cycle, is to kickstart it off right away with change management, not leave it till the last, day after UAT and then training, everybody else to get on the system. It's starting early, right?
Starting early and continuing the process, Andy, because even when you went through the CRM process, once you moved into BC, you didn't back off. You got your whole financial team involved, and you were there.
Oh, yes.
And again, these two implementations didn't happen at the same time, right? They were one after the other. Did your users experience, change fatigue? Oh my gosh, we just, learned Dynamics. You're doing this again for us? How did that get translated as you moved over to the new project?
Yes and no.
Between?
It wasn't too bad. Well, after we went live, we spent another 9 months refining Dynamics. So we had we had queued up a lot of stuff that had not made the cut, so to speak, to make sure we hit our go live for the transition. Right. And there's also things that we discovered as people started actually using the system. Of course, my boss decides he wants to call me right now. That as people were using it, we discovered there were certain things that were still clunky that we can streamline out, or things that we thought we were going to use that we were no longer using, and things that we were like, oh, we'll never touch that, and like, oh, I think we need that back. So after go live, we ended up having like a smaller a couple months later, we did like a little almost like a point release, and then we had a much larger update to just how we use Dynamics, done I think 6 or so months afterwards. So after like about 9 months, we got Dynamics more or less to the place that we're at now. Like, we've done some tweaks here and there, but we haven't done like a massive change to how we use Dynamics since since those initial set of releases. So that was
and then you did a pulse check, it sounds like. Okay.
Yeah. And so we still, during all that, we still didn't touch ERP, because to your point, there was fatigue in regards to like our finance team was like, we're getting used to this too. We're not touching it. But once CRM, steadied itself, then our finance team was like, okay, let's start thinking through this. But in between that, before we started fully looking at it, we started looking at Power BI as well, for reporting, because part of the recognition as we were doing CRM was out of the box Dynamics reporting. It's basically they're basically glorified spreadsheets with some tables and stuff. And there's a lot more in-depth analytics that our internal teams wanted to do. And so we started putting a heavy emphasis in exploring Power BI. And so we ended up doing that for a bit before we actually ended up getting internal Power BI resource, which was the key trigger to us solving the Power BI sort of mystery there. But we did work with Velosio to get Power BI stood up, connected to Dynamics, and get us kickstarted. And then once we had our internal resource, it immediately took off from there. And so it was a little bit of that before we really jumped headfirst into ERP. Into looking at Business Central.
And I assume, again, you just picked Dynamics BC. That's the answer for GST.
No, it was not. It worked out perfectly, but so somewhat similar situation of we very much wanted to be a fair game. I think at that point in my mind, initially I wasn't sure because Business Central, I can't remember the years are blurring, but I know Business Central was relatively new and partially like by delaying us going to it worked out because Business Central became ready for us to jump to. Because if it wasn't Business Central, I strongly doubt we would have went to Microsoft because I feel that their solutions prior to Business Central didn't fit us as an organization. And I say that in the sense that like we as a firm, at this point we had grown to about 100 staff, so still a small mid-sized firm, but the way we handle a lot of our finances was very similar to firms much, much larger than us. And one of the things that I discovered very quickly in looking at the marketplaces for similar ERP systems is that you have ones that are big. You have your Oracles, your SAPs, your old school Great Plains and all the old Microsoft legacy platforms, or you have things like Sage 50 and like small mom and small like systems that are aimed for mom and pop shops or like independent contractors and so forth. And that middle ground is shockingly not well serviced in the industry until Business Central came around, like there in many ways. So, when we started looking at systems, like we kicked the tires again at NetSuite, but we kind of knew at that point, since we clearly didn't go CRM with NetSuite, that it wouldn't make much sense to be like, oh, we went Microsoft here, let's go NetSuite, because that would just create more problems in the long term. So for us, it ended up becoming Microsoft Business Central because it seemed to fit perfectly into what we wanted to do. And so this time around, in my mind, that was my personal front runner. But we also looked at two other firms, again, one other boutique one, and then we looked at Sage, of course, has their own suite of products, and they had one that was also cloud-based and aimed at a similar, market or industry size as us. So it became down to those three, and then the boutique one fell out very quickly, and it was really between Sage and Business Central. And here, in many ways, Microsoft just won out by sheer simplicity of cost, and just like straight cost, period, both simplicity and just straight cost, because Microsoft was just like, how many users do you have? This is what we're going to charge. And that is pretty much it. And it was very inexpensive per user. Whereas Sage had, like, there was a charge for the engine, there was a charge for the reporting piece, there was another charge for this, and then there was like these licensing charges on top of that. And then it was like shocking to me. It was like an order of magnitude more expensive than Microsoft. And so it was an absolute no-brainer because functionally they did the same thing. So we knew, like, from an implementation, at least, roughly implementation should be roughly the same, but our licensing on Microsoft would be, a fraction, absolute fraction of what we would have had to pay Sage for the same thing.
And you mentioned that your current ERP was doing the job. It was getting things done. So moving to BC, awesome. There's savings there, or it's not that much more expensive, it sounds like.
Yeah, it wasn't going to be a savings based on Sage 50, but nothing would have been.
Yeah, for your next iteration. Good point. Beyond that, did you get anything additional that maybe you were looking for? Because again, your product, at that time was getting the job done. Did you get anything on top of just the day-to-day operations? Did Lorna find some magic thing that, you guys were like, oh, I really wrote that?
Well, can we go with cloud-based?
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of a sudden, there's no servers anymore. Right. Everything's up there in the cloud. You also ended up with, when PSA was up and running and BC is up and running, you have a highly sophisticated integration between the two products. That's updating your financial system. It's keeping your CRM system in line. And I mean, that's pretty significant. I know you had it with Sage, but what you got in the end is probably 5 times better than you had.
It's way better. It's it's just, yeah, no, it's a difference between like a country road between like a dirt country road between Sage and Dynamics versus a superhighway that runs between BC and CRM.
Yeah. And when we did this deployment, it was also 2020. So it was the height of COVID. There was a lot of stress and people were working from home. So being able to do that implementation the way my team does it, all very remote, was a blessing, but also probably a big challenge to your team.
It was a huge challenge for our finance team because until COVID, our finance team of all the teams was the one that was by far always in the office, always sitting together in their pod, always working together. And suddenly they're all split up, working from home, and so for them, just getting used to the new work dynamics was hard. And so, for them to keep up with their day-to-day job in many ways was, for them, for some of them was a challenge just to adjust. And then, oh yeah, by the way, we still need you to give feedback to Lorna's team and then eventually UAT and, double check this. And they're like, I just want to, I just need to make sure I'm paying invoices, or I need to make sure I'm doing this or that. And so there was definitely that curve for them to get through on top of it. So we definitely, this one, the project did get delayed because of that, because our not because of anything that Lorna or Velosio did, but just simply like our team just needed more time to get reacclimated to everything.
Reacclimated. And Andy, we did change the scope and the style of the project because we went in with an idea of the modules we were going to deploy and how it was going to work. And once we got in there, we put the brakes on and said, this isn't right. It's not the right, whatever module, it's not the right tool. We have to go back. And thankfully you were there to keep your team motivated. And it goes back to your change management skill where you kept them focused on the end result. Yeah. And collaborating with us and telling us what they really needed. So
right, because this is actually that's a great point, because one of the things that through my experience you discover is that folks that have done their job for a very long time, they'll give their requirements. They'll be like, I need to do A, then I need to do B, and then I need to do C, and then the person takes those requirements and they try to build a system to do A, B, and C. When the question should be, what is your end goal? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Oh, I need to produce an invoice that has these fields. Okay, so technically you don't have to do A, B, or C. You just need this end product of an invoice that has these things. So instead of doing A, B, and C, you're gonna swipe left and do this instead, and it'll be faster, and you do that. And part of the challenge is sometimes folks are so set in their ways, like, I can't swipe left. I have to do A, B, and C. And it's like, but and then it's working with them.
That muscle memory.
Yeah, but it's also just working with them to understand. They want to be heard. They want to feel like they're understood, and eventually you get them around to understanding, like, the end goal is you need to produce this by this period, this by that period, and you need to have this, and the data has to be accurate. So those are the things that are important. The physical steps that you do can change a million different ways, and our goal is that if they do change, they're going to change for the better. It'll be easier, and easier meaning less steps, not that you're not used to it. Like, so, and it's getting to understand that, like, it may look different. It may have different colors. The fields may be arranged a little differently, or, the steps you do are different, but that doesn't mean it's bad, or it doesn't mean it's not meeting your requirements. And that was a lot of, like, what Lorna was implying was that was a lot of discussions that I was having with the finance team about it. And one of the nice things of doing Dynamics first with Erica was that they had seen how it worked, and they saw that it did work. Because I do feel that if we done this first, there would have been a lot more distrust and a lot more stress about believing in the process and the system. Yeah, but
dealing with, yeah, absolutely.
But because they saw Erica's team, like, do literally the same thing, and they were very happy with the results, and not directly with them, but they just knew that this is what happened, and they were like, well, that worked. Like, because one of their first questions that, like, one of our finance folks will almost always ask, well, how did this work in Dynamics? And then I will be like, well, this is what we did with Erica's team, and she'll be like, okay, and then
I think that's important to call out. These are two different teams, Lorna and Erica's team. I mean, they have their focus areas, but again, the user experience is incredibly important. And just to your point, Andy, they saw success the first time around. It is another set of people, but they have that trust. And guess what? It delivered just like the first group of people. So I know we're almost at time, so I don't want to rush through this, but I do want to take a moment to talk about the end, right? You got past the urgency of getting off of Salesforce. You took an opportunity to reevaluate your ERP solution. Basically, what were the lessons learned? I think you hit on that, so there might not be a lot there, but how did this partnership work out for GSG? Was it what you were looking for? Did the organization, meet the needs, get their needs met in regards to a total solution in this endeavor that you've gone through over years? And what does that look like for GSG for the future?
100%. As a partner, you're basically everything that I want for a partner, because I can turn to Lauren, I can turn to Eric, I can turn to a number of other people not on this call from Velosio and ask questions and get answers in a way of people trying to solve what's wrong, as opposed to sometimes you work with like companies and their first thought is the bottom line, or how I can sell this to you, or how can I upsell or anything else. And here everything has been about like, let's figure out how to solve the problem, whatever the problem may be. And some of it is pretty simple, and some of it gets more complex. But things are always like, let's figure out how to solve it. And I have some of my best brainstorming discussions with people from Velosio, and some of it spans well beyond the realm of Microsoft Dynamics. Like, it may start there, and next thing you know, we're talking about stuff that that's IT related, that isn't even necessarily your wheelhouse or anything else, but we get into these in-depth discussions and we come up with these great ideas, and then it gets me to the point where like, I try to figure out like, how can I use you guys in this, as opposed to you guys trying to sell me on how can we like sell you more business.
Like a strategy session. Oh, that's great. How does that work with our...
Raihan knows this. Like, we've had discussions where it's just about like general IT strategy and structure and stuff, and it's been great. Like for from both ends. Like, I get a lot out of it. I'm sure he does too. And with others that aren't on this call, we have these discussions about how can we move things forward. What is that next step? Like, sometimes I don't know any more than you do, and so I just want to like throw some darts at the board and see how people react as to, yeah, I think that will work, or no, Andy, that's absolutely crazy. Go try that again.
How do you feel like all of this has set up GSG for the future? I mean, you came in to an organization many moons ago. You saw some areas of opportunity. Leadership has some area of opportunities. End users had areas of opportunity. It seems like you've tackled a good chunk of that. How is GSG set up for the future now, based on all that you've done thus far?
I feel like GSG is set up very well for the future. We have a platform that at the moment we're very happy with. It gets the work done. It is scalable and expandable to at least all the things that we can currently foresee. So taking into account like things that we can't, or any dramatic changes into the business and anything else. But and that's kind of what the best that you can hope for any system, is that if you presume business as usual, or presume everything that you kind of project could happen, and the systems that you have can help you meet those, you're in a great place. And I genuinely feel like, and this time I will say, knock on wood, that we are in a very good place. That for the last year and even this year, a lot of the areas that I've been focusing on for like improvement are more incremental improvement, more areas that are just new things that we're trying to do as a firm, as opposed to coming back and doing an overhaul like we did when I first got. Like, there's no plans to overhaul any of these systems like we did with Salesforce or with any of the legacy systems that I inherited when I first got here. Everything that we're
innovate. Now you're in the innovate phase, where you're looking for what new, what next, what is there an opportunity here, not just let's fix and improve here.
Yep.
Awesome, awesome, good stuff. I know we're at time. I don't want to cut anyone off. Does anyone else have any feedback on GSG and all that they've gone through in this? Essentially, this is what it is. It's a modernization project. Andy came in, and again, there was an opportunity to modernize and set up GSG not only for today's needs and requirements, but now he's at the point where now that it can look forward and look at what else can GSG do, what areas of opportunity can they expand with. Any feedback, Erica, Lorna, Raihan?
I'm just going to echo Andy, the change management, your ability to, and this is both sides, the ability to collaborate, because we had to collaborate. And I'm sure, Erica, during your project too, there was a lot of collaboration, is because we may have thought we had a vision from Velosio, and GSG is like, you guys just don't quite get it. It's sitting down at the table and listening, and then also coming to an agreement that makes sense, that GSG can say, yes, that will work, and Velosio says, yeah, we can do this work, and it will be successful. There won't be any backlash 6 months from now.
Right. Listening I think is a key word, like from both sides, is not sticking to your own agenda or what you have in your head, but truly listening to what the other side is saying.
Yep.
Good stuff. I believe we have a question.
No, we haven't had any come in, Carolyn. But I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Lorna, Carolyn, and Erica, and Raihan, and especially thank you to Andy at GSG for walking us through his story. I want to remind the audience that this session has been recorded. In the next couple days, you should receive an email with a link to that recorded webinar. And with that, I'll wish you guys all a great afternoon.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.